This is Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit digital resource produced by Charitable Communications. We'll tell the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. Casey Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, and we're proud to bring this show from the Plaza Library in our effort to get out and about in Kansas City. And today we can say we have the Kauffman Foundation here. We have Matt Pozel.
Word from your sponsor.
Oh, thank you. Well, we've been very excited to have you folks on to talk about the resource that Kauffman is in Kansas City and across the world. I mean, I have to say on other media, I always hear the Kauffman Foundation. So now we have you here to give us all the skinny, but I want to give your title because it's very important. Senior Media Writer and Producer in the Public Affairs Department
Right.
of Kauffman. So.
Right.
I don't know if people understand how robust the foundation is as an organization. Fill us in a little bit so folks can get an idea.
Well, let me just say that I came to the foundation as a writer. That's where I was trained in, and that's the way I told stories. The foundation way of telling stories is through video, so now I get to be a producer as well. That started with Mr. Kauffman himself, who sat down near the end of his life. He was convinced to tell his life story in front of a set of cameras. And so we have this wonderful resource of Ewing Kauffman in his own words, talking about his life growing up, starting the business, bringing the baseball team to Kansas City, and then eventually, and most importantly for us, what his expectations and hopes were for his foundation. So great resource. And then the story continues in the people we get to interview and meet at the foundation. The other thing I'll say is that the associates that I have a chance to work with, and we're all associates, that was a holdover from Marion Labs. Mr. Kauffman called his people he worked with associates and said, I don't want to manage people, but I would want to be associated with you. So we're all associates. And I will say that, just being among the people who are really experts in their field, and then they come to the foundation with a passion and sometimes with a bit of a frustration that their field could be better, is very energizing.
There is an overall arching philosophy and points that the foundation works on. Will you share those with us?
Well, one is every child, everywhere, should get the education that they deserve. We need to do a better job in education. And what that could prepare them for is to make their own job instead of taking a job. So those are the two philosophies, I guess, of the foundation. Again, they come right from Ewing Kauffman. When he was thinking about forming his philanthropy, the advice that he got was to look at the things that were most important in your life, those milestone moments, those moments of truth. And for him, it was the things that made the biggest difference were the education that he had a chance to receive. And that was in school and outside of school. I mean, I love that we're in the library because reading was fundamental to Mr. Kauffman's background. It took him out of a poor upbringing in Kansas City. He actually had a heart ailment when he was 11 years old and had to be in bed for a year. So his mom, who is a college graduate, was determined that he wasn't going to fall behind in school. So she went to the library and brought him books. He became an avid reader, and that was something that lasted throughout his life. In fact, he later said that one year in bed was the most important year of his life because it introduced him to books and the world that they bring us. The other signature moment in his life was the chance to start his own business. And so that's what he wanted for other people. He wanted the education in school and out of school. He wanted people to be curious about their lives and about the world around them, and then maybe become an entrepreneur.
So in the formation of a foundation, how do you keep true to that core vision that he really had? And I think it's remarkable that he even sat and thought about what his foundation, now his legacy would be.
Well, that's a great question because that's an issue with large philanthropic foundations. Mission drift. There's a famous book in philanthropy called The Golden Donors, Donors, and it was written by Wally Nielsen, who was a New York Times reporter and then went to work for the Ford Foundation. And he wrote this book, which is a bit of an indictment about foundations and how, well-meaning, ambitious board members can come on, and there are way more problems in the world that deserve attention than any foundation can focus on. And so you become, a mile wide and an inch deep, and you're not really making a difference, and you're spread so thin. The thing that helps us, again, is those recordings of Mr. Kauffman. I mean, that keeps us very focused on education and entrepreneurship. There are other very worthwhile causes. In fact, Mrs. Kauffman, the advice that the Kauffmans receive, instead of starting a family foundation like the Heinz Foundation in Pittsburgh, the advice that the Kauffman family received is, if Mrs. Kauffman is passionate about something,
Let her go do it.
Right, and it was the arts,
Right.
and so her crescendo is the Kauffman Center for the Performing Arts, and
fabulous.
and that allows her foundation to be strictly focused on the arts, and allows us to be focused on entrepreneurship, education, and then also civic life in Kansas City. I mean, Kansas City was Mr. Kauffman's hometown, and so we always have been and always will be devoted to Kansas City.
Well, I think one of the very common legacies, I'm looking at the program that you brought to share, is the Royals.
Right.
And we were chatting a little bit about his vision for that team was really to draw from all over, that it wasn't just Kansas City, this was home,
Yeah.
but to pull in
Yeah.
and reach out. How does inclusivity play into what the foundation does in its work?
Let me say this. I think our work starts with listening, not talking. And so we want to hear from the community. And we want to hear from the experts in the field that are already working in those areas. There are good ideas that just maybe need to be elevated. There are opposing ideas that need to come together. And that's another thing that we feel like we can do in Kansas City or around the country, is to bring people together that may not typically be together and share ideas, talk through different points of view, and try to come to a consensus that's going to move things forward. And that means including everybody in the conversation. One of the things that we found, particularly in entrepreneurship, is there's gaps. It's not an even playing field for women and for people of color. I mean, they don't have the funding opportunities. They don't have the access to some of the networks that have been established, whether they're funding networks or just mentoring. So we could do a better job in that. Kansas City has a great tradition of entrepreneurs who are women and people of color that we don't talk about much. The sisters from Children's Mercy Hospital, the Berry sisters, who were a medical doctor and a dentist. In the day that wasn't common,
unheard of.
right? And then, because people didn't want to come to a woman who was a doctor or a dentist, they found people that nobody else would treat, the indigent people and children, and opened their mercy bed to them. I feel like the Berry sisters need to be talked about a little bit more. Nell Donnelly Reed, Nellie Don. I mean, there's a great documentary about her. I think there's even a play.
There's a musical.
A musical, that's great. But her story, I mean, I don't think people realize how pervasive her business was, the house dresses that she made across America. I would want, little girls in Kansas City to know that story, to know the sisters at Children's Mercy Hospital. People of color need to know the story of Tom Bass, who was a slave in Mexico, Missouri, and won his freedom, came to Kansas City and trained horses and invented a bit for horses that is still used today. That's a more humane way. It protects the horse's mouth. And he was instrumental in the American Royal in Kansas City. The history of barbecue in Kansas City, Perry, who started barbecue, and then both Gates and the Bryant family grew out of that. those stories need to be told. And you know, the Ewing Kauffman story, the Block brothers, there are others that get told over and over again, the Hall family. But we need to be more inclusive about the stories that we tell too.
How do you all go about that? How do you get that out there so that the high school girl or the African American kid in the middle school who has an idea, but I mean, so how do you get that out there and how do you help them?
Well, I think for us, for our contribution, it's about storytelling. It's about sponsoring stories like this about what nonprofits are doing and gaining visibility for those stories. On the program side, I mean, there's different ways that we can influence programs or support programs. They could be programs that are existing that we want to bring funding to. They could be programs that we do an RFP style of ask out in the community to say, is there anybody doing this? In fact, we have an inclusive grant program for entrepreneurship, and to try to find the support organizations that are doing a better job in bringing women and people of color into giving them opportunities in entrepreneurship. You know, there are programs that we've started on our own, like Kauffman Scholars, which was came from Mr. Kauffman's Project Choice,
Right.
and Kauffman Scholars, which then evolved into Kansas City Scholars, which is giving kids an opportunity through scholarships to go to school. And then also the added feature of the Kansas City Scholars, allows adults who, for one reason or another, left school and never went back. So we've had, 40, 50-year-old men and women earn a Kansas City scholarship to go back to school and finish their education.
You've done amazing things at the foundation, and the foundation seems, at least from my perspective, you were at the forefront of entrepreneurship. It just seemed like entrepreneurship got hot, and here was the Kauffman Foundation all along saying, well, yeah, how can we help? How can we further that? Why is that entrepreneur spirit important in a community?
Well, you know, first of all, we know that only about 3% of the population is going to take that leap. I mean,
It's a big leap.
It is. And, seeing the opportunity is one thing. Taking the risk to step in and do something about it is something else. So, what we talk about is there's 97% of us who aren't taking that risk, who aren't diving in. What can we do to support them? It could be something as easy as, pick three local businesses a week that you're going to be a customer of, and support them and let them know and let them know about the service that they're providing. Let your friends know about the places you've gone. So I think, for a number of years we were talking about entrepreneurship. I remember being very excited. I can't remember which president it was, but at one point, one of the presidents was giving the State of the Union address, and he said entrepreneurs. He didn't say small business. He said entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And so I think it is becoming more visible. I think we need to sometimes counteract sort of the Shark Tank version of entrepreneurships. And then we've also seen some pretty unethical behavior among entrepreneurs. I mean, I think it bears emphasizing that Mr. Kauffman, who was one of the world's and certainly one of this country's most successful entrepreneurs, based his business on two principles. One, treat others as you want to be treated, and two, share the rewards with those that produce. And so those were fundamental principles. This was 1950. This was Mad Men times when Mr. Kauffman started his business. And yet it was treat others as you want to be treated, share the rewards with those that produce. And we have many, many stories. It's not only Mr. Kauffman that we have on video, but we have many of his colleagues, associates, who will tell stories about what it meant to treat others as you want to be treated. Sometimes they were taken advantage of, and they knew that, but that wasn't enough for them to shake from that principle. So For us, you can do the right thing. You could do things ethically, and still do very well in your business.
What do you think he'd say today if, in this month of his birth, if he were here sitting with us? I could hear him saying, Matt, you got my story.
Well, it's share the rewards with those that produce. So for us, there is a high value on producing. I mean, there's an expectation, there's an urgency about doing that. I don't know if I get a pat on the back, but I would be encouraged to do more, because our time is short and the problems that we're trying to solve are pretty
big,
and we can't afford to take, a step forward and 2 steps back. So we don't want to do any harm in our grant making. We don't want to go down the wrong paths because we're wasting time and Mr. Kauffman's money. I think, I give tours of the foundation a lot, and we have a statue. If you've been to the Kauffman Foundation, we have a statue of Mr. and Mrs. Kauffman. It used to be at Kauffman Stadium, and then when they renovated the stadium, they wanted to put the statue in storage, and we said, well, we'll keep it in front of our building, and then in the meantime, they commissioned a new statue that has Mr. and Mrs. Kauffman more animated, and it's a great statue. It's in the left field area of Kauffman Stadium, so we got to keep our statue. Also, as you walk into the foundation, as you may know, we have a replica bust of Mr. Kauffman that's in the rotunda at Jefferson City in the Hall of Famous Missourians. So 2 statues of Mr. Kauffman. Now, you ask what he would, I'm not sure if he would be too thrilled about statues of himself. But another thing we have, as you come through the entrance of the Kauffman Foundation, there's a mosaic that you pass under that's a girl named Kelly Kennedy, who was in Project Choice. The artist took a Polaroid picture of her dancing at a retreat and made it into this giant mosaic that's above our door. That I think he would like. That I think he would say, that's the legacy. It's not about me. It's not about statues. It's not about this beautiful building or the Performing Arts Center or the baseball stadium or any of that stuff. It's about Kelly. It's about students today. It's about the people this morning who were at 1 Million Cups at Plex Pod in Westport, who were presenting their business ideas. And they weren't getting the Shark Tank treatment. They were getting their peers helping them with the problems, identifying, having empathy for what they were going through as entrepreneurs. So that's the legacy.
We are so lucky to have Kauffman Foundation here, and thank you for giving us insight into it. We appreciate it.
Can I say one thing? I really appreciate you getting me over to the library. When I was little, when we moved, my parents would take us to 2 places. Sometimes before we emptied the boxes in our house, we would go to register to vote, so my parents could vote, and go to the library and get our library card. So the library has always been special to me. I love that it's right up the street from us, and I love being here for this.
And we love doing these episodes here, and thanks for helping to allow us to do that.
You're welcome. Thank you.